When I first saw her, I stopped breathing. A bear, huge, dark, and silent, stood in the middle of the trail, staring straight at me. For a moment, the world froze. No wind, no birds, just her and me. My fingers tightened around the rifle slung across my chest, but I didn't lift it. Something in her eyes held me like chains. She wasn't growling. She wasn't charging. She wasn't even afraid. She was waiting. And then it hit me. She wasn't looking at me like prey. She was looking at me like someone begging for help. My heart slammed so hard, I thought I'd hear it echo through the trees. I've hunted for 20 years. I know what a bear looks like when it wants to kill you, and this wasn't it. There was no rage in her stare, no wild hunger, only something I'd never seen in an animal before. Something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I whispered to myself, "What in God's name?" My voice sounded strange in that dead silence. She didn't flinch, didn't move. Her head was low, not in threat, but in... what? Submission? No, not quite. It was like she needed me to understand something. Every instinct screamed at me to back away, turn around, leave, but I couldn't move, because she blinked, slowly, and when her eyes opened again, I swear I saw something that didn't belong in the wilderness. Desperation. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. Bears don't plead, they don't ask, they take. Everyone knows that. But then she did something that sent chills down my spine. She turned, not quick, not running, just turned her massive body like a shadow sliding across the snow. She took 3 steps down the trail and stopped. Then, like something out of a dream, she looked back over her shoulder, right at me, and in that second, I felt it. She was asking me to follow. I laughed under my breath because what else could I do? The sound cracked in the stillness like glass breaking. Follow a bear? I must have lost my mind. Yet there I was, frozen, staring at her broad back and the way her fur rippled in the fading light. She took another step, slow, heavy, snow crunching under her paws. Then she paused again and looked back. My gut twisted. "What do you want?" I murmured. My voice trembled, and I hated how small it sounded. I don't know what made me take that first step. Curiosity? Instinct? Something older, buried deep, whispering that this wasn't chance. This was something else. But the moment my boots sank into the snow, I swear I saw it. Her ear flicked back, and for a heartbeat, I thought, relief. I gripped the rifle tighter, my breath puffing in sharp clouds. Every nerve in me screamed, this was suicide. If she turned, I'd never have time to raise the gun. Still, I followed. She moved slowly, deliberately, like she wanted to make sure I kept up. Every dozen steps, she'd glance back. Not like a predator stalking its prey, not like a creature warning me off, like a mother checking if her child was still there. That's when the fear started to mix with something else, something that felt a lot like awe. My boots crunched in her tracks, each one the size of a dinner plate. Her shoulders rolled like living mountains, muscles sliding under fur. And yet, I didn't feel hunted. I felt chosen. I shook my head hard, trying to snap out of it. Bears don't choose people. They kill them, tear them apart like paper. But the deeper we went, the more certain I became. She wanted me there. She needed me there. I don't know how long we walked. Minutes? Hours? Time didn't exist. There was only the rhythm of her paws and the pounding in my ears. Finally, she stopped, dead still. My breath caught like a snare. She turned her massive head and locked eyes with me again. And in those eyes, I swear to you, I saw a question, a plea. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. And then, as if satisfied, she swung her head forward and stepped off the trail, vanishing into the wall of trees. I stood there, heart trying to escape my chest, snow soaking into my boots, every nerve screaming that this was my chance to walk away, to go back to the world where things made sense. I almost did. I almost turned around, but something deep inside whispered, "Not yet." I tightened my grip on the rifle, staring into the darkness where she disappeared, and then I followed. I thought that was it. She'd turn and vanish into the forest, but I couldn't have been more wrong. I stepped off the trail, and the sound of my boots in the snow felt like a gunshot in the silence. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to stop, to turn around, to get the hell out of there. But I didn't. She was ahead of me, moving like a shadow through the trees, slow and deliberate, her massive shoulders swaying with each step. And every few strides, she did it again. Turned her head, eyes catching mine, holding me there, like she was making sure I was still coming. It wasn't a warning, it wasn't a threat, it was something else. She kept glancing back, like a mother checking if her child was keeping up. My breath hung in front of me in ragged clouds. The cold stung my face, but my palms were slick inside my gloves. My finger twitched near the trigger guard. Instinct was screaming, "Don't follow a bear into the forest, ever." But instinct wasn't running the show anymore. Something deeper was, something I couldn't name. The forest swallowed us. Branches clawed at my jacket as I pushed through, boots sinking into drifts. The deeper we went, the darker it got. The light from the trail was gone, and the quiet. God, the quiet was like being underwater. I studied her as we moved. Her body was a wall of muscle, every movement slow and powerful. But her posture, it didn't fit the predator I knew. Her head stayed low. Her ears weren't flat. There was no rage in her shoulders. If anything, she looked tired, and that hit me like a punch. A tired bear is a dangerous bear, but the way she kept looking back, pausing until I caught up, that wasn't aggression. That was patience. I muttered under my breath, "What are you doing?" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the snow and trees. She didn't answer. Of course she didn't. She just turned again and pressed deeper into the woods. Every step felt like stepping off a cliff. Was I insane? Following a predator that could kill me in a heartbeat? Alone, miles from anyone? But the truth burned in my chest. I couldn't stop. Not when every look from her said, "Don't leave me now." My mind twisted with possibilities. Maybe she had a kill stashed somewhere. Maybe she was leading me right to it, waiting for me to drop my guard so she could finish the job. The thought sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I tightened my grip on the rifle, tried to steady my breathing. Every shadow looked like movement. Every crack of ice underfoot sounded like the start of a charge. My heart was a drum in my ears, pounding so loud I almost missed the sound. The soft crunch of her paws slowing. She stopped, dead still. I froze behind a tree, my chest heaving. The world narrowed to the steam curling from her fur and the silence pressing against my skull. She turned her head again, and for the first time, I saw something I'll never forget. Her mouth was open slightly, her breath coming heavy, like she'd been running for miles. And her eyes, they weren't wild, they weren't cold, they were pleading. I felt my throat tighten. "What is this?" I whispered. She blinked slowly, then turned and kept going. Not fast, not like a hunter, like a guide. And God help me, I followed again. The trees thinned just enough for a pale shaft of winter light to spill across the snow, turning everything silver. And in that light, her tracks looked impossibly big, like the marks of some ancient creature that didn't belong in this world. I kept staring at those tracks, thinking, if I die out here, no one will ever know why. No one would believe me even if I told them. Another turn of her head, another look that pinned me in place, and in that moment, I knew something with absolute certainty. She wasn't leading me to kill me. She was leading me because she needed me. I just didn't know why yet. I thought maybe she was leading me to her kill, and that would be the end of me. But that wasn't it. The farther we went, the heavier the silence became. At first, I thought it was just the forest muffling sound under the snow, but then I realized There was nothing. No birds, no rustle of squirrels, not even the faint whisper of wind through the pines. It felt wrong, like the whole wilderness was holding its breath. Every instinct in me screamed to turn around, go back to the trail, go back to the world where things made sense. But my boots kept moving, crunch after crunch, following the wide paw prints through the white hush. And then I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, a flicker in her movement, barely there. But when she stepped into a patch of pale light, it was clear. She was limping. My heart slammed so hard it hurt. The bear, the massive, terrifying creature I'd been fearing for the last half hour, wasn't whole. Her left hind leg dragged slightly with every step, leaving a shallow groove in the snow. I stopped dead, staring at that mark, at her slow, heavy stride. My breath fogged in front of me as something inside me twisted hard. Fear started to crack, just a little, and something else seeped through the cracks, something I hadn't expected. Pity. That's when it hit me. She wasn't hunting. She was hurting. I gripped the rifle tighter, but not because I was afraid of her anymore, because suddenly I was afraid of what this meant. A wounded bear is dangerous, unpredictable, desperate. She could turn on me in a heartbeat, but she didn't. She kept moving, head low, breath coming in slow, heavy bursts that plumed like smoke in the cold air. Every few steps, she looked back, and when our eyes met this time, I swear to you, it wasn't just a look. It was a question, a plea so sharp it cut straight through me. I whispered, "What happened to you?" My voice cracked like dry wood. She didn't answer, of course, just turned and pushed deeper into the trees, limping like every step cost her. The forest seemed endless now, a maze of white and black and silence. My boots crunched in her tracks as thoughts tore through my head. How did she get hurt? A fight? A trap? A bullet from someone like me? That last thought hit like a punch. I actually stopped and grabbed a tree, steadying myself as my stomach turned. Someone like me. I stared down at my hands gripping the rifle, at the gloves stained with old blood from another hunt, and for a second, I hated myself. Then she turned her head again, and the world narrowed to those eyes, waiting for me. I didn't know what I was doing anymore. I didn't know why I was still following. This was insane, beyond insane. I was deep in the woods with a wounded bear, something you'd only do if you had a death wish. But it didn't feel like death waiting for me up ahead. It felt like something else, something bigger. I kept walking. Branches whipped at my jacket, the cold biting harder as the trees closed in. My breath burned in my throat, and still, the silence hung thick, pressing against my ears. No life, no sound, just me and her, two creatures stumbling through the frozen world for reasons I couldn't explain. Finally, she slowed, stopped. I froze too, chest heaving, sweat prickling under my clothes despite the cold. She stood there, a dark shape against the pale snow, sides rising and falling with heavy breaths. Then she turned her head, not quick, not sharp, but slow, deliberate. And that look, God help me, that look almost brought me to my knees. There was no wildness in it, no rage, only pain, and something else, something I couldn't name but felt in my bones. I almost turned back. Almost. I even took a step, felt the pull of survival tugging me hard, but then I saw what she wanted me to see. We broke through a tangle of spruce, and suddenly, the forest opened up into a small clearing. The snow here was untouched, a pale sheet of silence under a sky the color of steel. My boots sank deep as I stepped forward, breath burning in my lungs. That's when I heard it, faint, fragile, a sound that didn't belong out here in the frozen stillness. At first, I thought it was wind whistling through the branches, but then it came again, thin, high-pitched, like a squeal smothered by snow, a cry. My blood went cold. My eyes swept the clearing, heart hammering like a war drum. And then I saw it. Just beyond the center of the clearing, a massive tree lay splintered and half buried in white, its roots torn from the earth like broken ribs. At its base, the snow was churned, clawed through with frantic marks, and sticking out from under the shattered trunk. A paw, small, fur matted with ice, barely moving. I sucked in a breath so hard it cut my throat. It wasn't a piece of prey, it wasn't a carcass. It was a cub, trapped. The sound came again, weaker this time, a muffled whimper under the weight of the fallen tree. Oh God. The words tumbled out of me, raw, useless in the dead air. I turned, and that's when I saw her. The bear, the mother. She had stopped just a few feet away from the tree and lowered herself to the ground. Not charging, not warning me off, just waiting. And when her eyes found mine, the bottom dropped out of my world. She looked at me like a mother handing her child to a stranger. Every hair on my body stood on end. My pulse pounded in my ears as I stared back at her, my breath coming in ragged clouds. If she wanted me dead, this was it. One swipe, one lunge, and I'd be nothing but blood on snow. But she didn't move. She stayed there, massive and still, her breath rising in soft plumes, her eyes locked on mine with something that made my throat close. Not hunger, not rage, something closer to trust. The rifle felt heavy across my back, suddenly obscene in my hands. I let it slide off my shoulder and drop into the snow. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence, and I flinched, but she didn't. Not even a twitch. Slowly, so slowly it felt like moving through water. I stepped toward the fallen tree. My boots sank deep, every crunch of snow like thunder in my skull. The cub's tiny paw flexed once, a feeble twitch, then stilled again. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely pull my gloves off. My breath tore out in clouds as I dropped to my knees beside the trunk. The cold bit hard, but I barely felt it. The tree was huge, too heavy to move, but maybe I could free enough of the branches. My fingers closed around the nearest limb, splintered and sharp, and I yanked hard. Bark shredded my palms as it gave with a crack. The cub whimpered, a sound so faint it almost broke me in half. Behind me, I heard the mother exhale, a deep, rumbling sound that vibrated in my bones. I froze, heart slamming, sure that was the end. But when I turned my head, she was still lying there, still watching. Her eyes weren't wild, they weren't cold. They were something I never thought I'd see in a creature like her. Hope. I ripped another branch loose, teeth clenched so hard my jaw ached. Snow and bark showered my face, but I didn't care. I clawed like a madman, adrenaline drowning out the cold, the fear, everything. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I cleared enough to see the cub's head, eyes squeezed shut, tiny muzzle flecked with frost. Still alive. Barely. I slid my arms under its little body, muscles screaming as I pried it free from the weight of the wood. It came loose with a sucking sound, a choked cry bursting from its throat as I lifted it into the light. For a second, I just knelt there, clutching this trembling scrap of life, breath ragged in the frozen air. And then I looked up. The mother rose to her feet in one slow, silent motion. She didn't roar. She didn't charge. She just stepped forward, each movement like rolling thunder through the snow. My chest locked. My arms tightened around the cub. If this was how it ended, at least it would end with the little one out of the trap. But she didn't attack. She stopped just a breath away from me. And then, soft as a prayer, she lowered her head. I thought freeing the cub would be the end of it. I had no idea what this would lead to. The cub was wedged tight, its tiny ribs heaving under the weight of the fallen tree. I'd managed to pull away some of the smaller branches, but the trunk itself was a monster, too heavy to move without tools. My hands were raw and trembling, blood pricking where bark had torn skin through my gloves. I fumbled for the hatchet on my belt, fingers clumsy from cold and adrenaline. The metal burned against my skin as I gripped the handle. Behind me, the mother shifted. Just a single step, the crunch of snow like thunder. I froze, heart hammering against my ribs. Every instinct told me to run, but then I heard it. That sound, a low rumble, not a growl, not a threat. Something softer, almost impatient. I risked a glance. She wasn't coming at me, she wasn't even snarling. She was pacing, slow arcs in the snow, her massive head swinging back toward the cub every few seconds. Every line of her body screamed tension, not anger, but desperation. And that's when it hit me. Every swing of my axe, I could feel her eyes burning into my soul, not with rage, but with hope. The weight of that crushed me harder than fear ever could. She was trusting me with the only thing in this world that mattered to her. And God help me, I couldn't fail. I wedged the axe against the first thick limb and swung hard. The crack of wood split the silence, and the cub whimpered, a sharp cry that punched straight through my chest. "Easy," I muttered, voice shaking as much as my hands. "Hang on, little one, just hang on." Behind me, snow crunched again, closer this time. My breath caught, but I didn't dare look. If I saw her standing over me, jaws inches from my neck, I'd lose it completely. I swung again, and again. Splinters exploded into the air, dusting the snow like shards of bone. My arms burned, my gloves slick with sweat despite the freezing cold. The cub cried louder now, a thin, desperate wail that cut through the stillness like a blade. Every sound was a countdown, a clock ticking towards something I didn't want to imagine. Finally, the branch cracked and gave way. I yanked it free, tossing it aside, and went for the next one. Teeth gritted so hard my jaw ached. Each swing was agony, my muscles screaming, my breath tearing out in clouds. But I didn't stop, couldn't stop, because behind me, she was watching, and somehow that mattered more than my own life. The next branch broke, then the next. My hands felt like meat, my shoulders like fire. I lost track of how many I cut, how many times the axe bit into wood and bounced back with a shock that rattled my bones. And then, the last branch gave way with a groan, splitting in two and tumbling into the snow. For a moment, nothing happened. Just silence, just the cold air burning in my lungs and the wild, frantic pounding of my heart. Then the cub moved. It wriggled free, paws scrabbling against the snow as it dragged itself out from the tangle of wood. Its tiny body shook like a leaf in the wind, eyes blinking against the light. Alive. By some miracle, it was alive. A sound tore from my throat. A laugh, or maybe a sob. I couldn't tell. My vision blurred as I reached down and scooped the cub up in my arms, clutching it against my chest. It was lighter than I expected, its fur stiff with frost, its heartbeat a rapid flutter against my palms. I turned, slow, terrified of what I'd see, and there she was. The mother bear had stopped pacing. She was standing motionless, towering and terrible and magnificent, her breath rolling in slow clouds, and her eyes, God, those eyes, were fixed on me, on the tiny life trembling in my arms. For a second, we just stared at each other, two creatures from different worlds, locked in a moment that felt like the center of the universe. Then I bent down, heart in my throat, and set the cub gently in the snow. It tottered once, then stumbled forward on shaky legs, squeaking as it reached her. She lowered her head, nudging the little one close, pulling it into the thick curtain of her fur. A low sound rumbled from her chest, not a growl, but something softer, something like relief. I sagged back on my heels, muscles trembling, breath tearing out in clouds. Every part of me screamed that this was it, that she'd take her cub and disappear into the trees. I thought she'd take her cub and disappear, but that's not what happened. The cub stumbled through the snow like a drunk, squeaking softly as it wobbled toward her massive frame. She bent down, nose brushing its tiny body with a gentleness that didn't seem possible from something so powerful. She nuzzled it close, checked every inch, then let out a low, rumbling sound that almost sounded like a sigh. I should have felt relief. I should have turned around right then and there, thanked whatever force had kept me alive, and gotten the hell out. But I couldn't move. I just stood there, knees buried in snow, staring like an idiot while the mother bear curled herself around her cub like a living fortress. It was a picture of love so raw, so primal, it punched straight through my chest. And then she looked at me. Not a quick glance, not a warning glare. A look that held me where I knelt like chains. Her eyes found mine, and something in them shifted. She gave the cub one last nudge, then turned, slowly, with a grace that didn't belong in a body that big, and started walking toward me. My heart stopped, literally stopped. My chest locked so tight it hurt. Every survival instinct I had roared awake in an instant. Move, run, do something. But I couldn't. My body wouldn't listen. The snow crunched under her paws, deep and deliberate, as she closed the distance between us. Each step felt like the toll of a bell, counting down the last seconds of my life. 20 feet, 10, 5. She was close enough now that I could see the frost clinging to her fur, the scars etched across her muzzle, the rise and fall of her massive chest. Her breath rolled over me in hot clouds that smelled of earth and pine. I was shaking so hard my teeth chattered. My hands twitched toward the rifle lying in the snow, but I didn't reach for it. Somehow, deep down, I knew, if I did, it would all shatter. She stopped, right in front of me. For one breathless, endless moment, the world held still. Just me, her, and the silent woods pressing in like a cathedral of ice. And then, she lowered her head, not to strike, not to bite. She lowered her head to the ground, so slow, so deliberate, it stole the air from my lungs. She bowed. A wild bear bowed to me. I stared, frozen, my pulse pounding like a war drum in my ears. I didn't understand. I couldn't understand. My throat burned, and before I knew it, tears were spilling hot down my frozen face, because in that single gesture, everything inside me broke. Every wall I'd ever built, every story I'd ever told myself about what wild animals are, gone, shattered like glass under a hammer. This wasn't instinct. This wasn't randomness. This was something else, something bigger than me, bigger than words. She held the bow for what felt like forever, and then, slowly, she lifted her head. Her eyes met mine one last time, and in them I saw something I'll never forget for as long as I live. Gratitude, not the human kind, something purer, older, something that didn't need language because it was older than language itself. And then she turned. I watched in a daze as she nosed the cub forward, her massive body wrapping protectively around the little one as they moved toward the trees. Their tracks etched a winding path through the snow, growing fainter with each step until the forest swallowed them whole. I sat there, shaking, tears freezing on my face, feeling like I'd touched the edge of some impossible truth, like the world had cracked open just enough to show me what lay behind the curtain. I thought that was the last time I'd see her, but nature had one more miracle. I don't remember how long I sat there after they vanished. Minutes? Hours? My legs were numb, my hands raw, and still I couldn't move. The clearing felt sacred, like I'd stepped into something I wasn't supposed to see. Finally, I forced myself to stand, slinging the rifle over my shoulder. My body felt like lead as I started back toward the trail, each step heavy in the snow. That's when I heard it, a faint crunch behind me, then another. I froze, heart lurching into my throat. Slowly, I turned and felt the world tilt. She was there, the mother bear, not charging, not even tense, just standing at the edge of the trees, her dark shape carved against the white. Her breath curled in clouds, eyes locked on me. I should have been terrified, but I wasn't. For the first time since this started, I felt safe. She stepped forward, snow collapsing under her paws with a soft hiss. My muscles tensed out of habit, but the fear didn't come. Instead, something strange swelled in my chest, a quiet, steady trust that made no sense at all. She turned, slow and deliberate, then glanced back. That same look, the one that had pulled me off the trail, dragged me into her world, and without thinking, I followed. We moved through the trees, the forest swallowing us again. Shadows stretched long across the snow, the last light bleeding out of the sky. My boots crunched in her tracks as the cold bit deeper, but I barely felt it. I didn't ask myself why anymore. I didn't fight it. Something bigger than reason was moving my feet now. Finally, the trees thinned, and we stepped out onto a frozen river. The ice was a mirror, cracked in places, dusted with powdery snow, and there, near the far bank, lay a shape that made my breath catch. An elk, a big one, its body sprawled on the ice, blood pooling in a dark halo against the white. Fresh kill. My stomach tightened as a dozen thoughts tore through my head. Was this hers? Was she leading me to it? Why? I stopped dead as she padded to the carcass. She stood over it for a moment, her massive frame dwarfing the fallen elk. Then, so slow I almost missed it, she stepped aside and looked at me. Not a warning look, not a glare, something else. It was like she was saying, "Thank you," like words, but stronger. I stood there, breath snagged in my chest, staring at her against that pale, endless sheet of ice. The kill at her feet, the cub somewhere safe behind us, and me, a man who'd come out here to hunt, frozen in a moment I couldn't explain if I lived 100 years. My throat burned, my eyes stung, because it hit me like a hammer. This wasn't random. This wasn't instinct. This was a gift from a creature that owed me nothing. I wanted to speak, to tell her I understood, that I didn't need anything, that what I'd been given already was bigger than any prize I'd ever dreamed of. But no sound came out. Only a raw, aching silence as tears blurred the edges of the world. We stood like that for what felt like forever, two beings from opposite worlds, bound together by something deeper than fear or hunger, something older than words. Finally, she turned. No rush, no sound but the soft hiss of snow as her paws slid across the ice. She didn't look back this time. She didn't need to. I thought I understood what happened, that she was saying thank you in the only way she could. But then came the part I'll never forget. I thought it was over when she turned her back on me at the river. I thought that was the last thread of whatever strange bond had tied us together. But I was wrong. She didn't vanish into the trees. Not yet. I saw movement behind her, a small, dark shape against the snow. The cub, limping slightly, but alive, whole. It tottered forward on wobbly legs, and she slowed, glancing back as if to make sure I saw. And then, God help me, she did something I still can't explain. She stopped, lowered her massive head, and with a gentle push of her muzzle, she nudged the cub toward me. I froze. Every nerve in my body screamed, "Don't move. Don't even breathe." But the cub came closer, its tiny paws crunching in the snow, leaving a trail of fragile prints that looked like punctuation marks in the white silence. It stopped right in front of me, so close I could see the frost clinging to its whiskers, the way its fur spiked in the cold. It tilted its head, curious, unafraid, and then, slowly, almost like it had all the time in the world, it sniffed the toe of my boot. Something broke inside me. I sank to my knees without thinking, breath coming in ragged clouds, eyes burning so hot tears froze on my lashes. My hand twitched like it wanted to reach out, but I didn't. Some part of me knew this moment wasn't mine to take. It was a gift. The cub blinked at me once, dark eyes shining like 2 drops of night, and then turned, wobbling back toward the shadow of its mother. And the strangest thing? She waited. She let it happen, like she was introducing us. My throat closed so tight it hurt. The only words that would come were a whisper, cracked and raw. "Go. Just go." She seemed to hear me. Or maybe she didn't need to. She lowered her head again, curling it gently around the cub as it pressed against her side, and for a long, breathless moment, we just stood there, three souls in the middle of a frozen wilderness, bound by something I couldn't name but could feel in every bone. Then she turned. No rush, no sound but the soft drag of her paws through the snow. The cub followed close, its tiny body dwarfed by the shadow of her frame. Step by step, they moved away from me, farther and farther, until the trees swallowed them whole. And then they were gone. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, sacred, like the whole forest was holding its breath, like I'd touched something eternal and the world would never look the same again. I just stood there, staring at the place where they disappeared, until the cold bit through to my bones and I realized my legs were shaking so bad I could barely stay upright. Finally, I turned and started back. Every step felt unreal, like I was walking out of a dream I'd never wanted to wake from. My rifle lay forgotten across my back, nothing but dead weight now. The man who had stepped into these woods that morning, the hunter, was gone. Because that day, I didn't take a life. I gave one back, and for that, I'd been given something I still don't have words for. As they walked away, the forest felt holy, like I had touched something eternal. I thought I'd never see her again, but nature had its own plans. Winter came back harder than anyone expected, the kind of winter that swallows sound, where the air bites deep and the snow crunches like broken glass under your boots. For months, I stayed away from that trail. Not because I didn't want to go, God knows I did, but because some things feel too sacred to disturb. But one morning, late in the season, something pulled me back. Call it instinct, call it madness, call it whatever you want. All I know is, I strapped on my pack, slung the same rifle over my shoulder, and started down that path again. The woods hadn't changed. Same towering pines, same silence thick enough to make your ears ring. My boots traced the same line through the snow, but I wasn't the same man who had walked it before. The hunter in me was gone, left somewhere in that clearing months ago. I reached the river by mid-afternoon. The ice was thick, a silver sheet stretching under a pale sky. Wind slid across its surface with a soft hiss, and for a long time, there was nothing, just me, the breath tearing from my lungs, and the endless hush of winter. And then, I saw her. At first, I thought it was a shadow, a trick of the light, but then it moved. A shape at the far bank, dark against the white, too big to be anything else, the bear. She stood there, massive and still, framed by the black skeletons of the trees. For a moment, the world narrowed to her and me, two specks in the endless wilderness. My throat closed. My legs felt like they'd turned to stone. Then another shape stepped out from behind her, smaller, leaner, moving with the awkward confidence of youth. The cub, grown now, no longer a scrap of life trapped under a tree, but a young bear, strong and steady. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. She didn't come closer, didn't growl, didn't make a sound. She just stood there, the wind stirring the fur along her shoulders, and stared across the frozen river. And then, so slow I almost didn't catch it, she lifted her head. Not high, not sharp, just enough. A small, deliberate motion that spoke louder than any sound I'd ever heard. It wasn't just an animal. It was a mother saying, "I remember." That was it. That tiny gesture shattered me. My knees buckled, and before I knew it, I was down in the snow, hands buried in the cold, tears freezing on my face faster than I could wipe them away. I didn't care. I couldn't stop. I sobbed like a child in the middle of the silent woods, because somehow that wild creature had reached inside me and pulled out everything I didn't know I was carrying. For a long time, we stayed like that, me kneeling in the snow, her standing proud and still on the far bank, the The cub pressed close to her side. Two worlds divided by ice, bound by something deeper than words. And then, just as slow as before, she turned. The cub followed, its paws leaving small tracks alongside hers as they slipped back into the shadow of the trees. I watched until they vanished, until the forest swallowed them whole. The silence came rushing back, heavy as the falling snow, and I knew I'd never see her again. Not like that. Maybe not ever. But I didn't need to, because some things don't fade. Some moments carve themselves into your bones, burn themselves into your blood. And that day, on a frozen river under a steel gray sky, a bear taught me something no human ever could. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I'd never believe it. But I did, and I'll never be the same. If you believe animals remember kindness, right, nature never forgets. I thought I was seeing a predator carrying its kill until I realized the wolf had a human baby in her jaws, and she was walking straight toward me. When I saw the she-wolf with a baby in her jaws, my breath caught in my throat, because I knew this wasn't an accident. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. It was late December, the kind of cold that cracks tree branches in the night. Snow was knee-deep, and there she was, moving down the narrow logging road, her paws sinking deep with every step. I froze where I stood, gripping the leather strap of my rifle, not daring to move. My heart was pounding so loud, I was certain she could hear it. I've spent more than 60 years in these woods. I've seen wolves before, fast, wary shadows, always ready to vanish. But this one, she was different. Her fur was thick with frost along her neck, her amber eyes fixed straight ahead, and in her jaws, God help me, was a human infant, not torn, not bleeding. The baby was wrapped in a thin, ice-crusted blanket. I swear I saw a tiny arm slip free, skin red from the cold, and the she-wolf lifted her head higher, so that little hand wouldn't brush the snow. My brain raced for an explanation. Was it an attack? A rescue? Was I hallucinating from the cold? Every instinct screamed to act, but something in her steady, deliberate steps held me in place. She stopped when she saw me. Snow drifted down onto her muzzle, onto the baby's blanket. She didn't flinch. There was no fear in her eyes. And that terrified me more than any growl could have. Wolves should fear people. They don't walk straight toward them. I didn't breathe. My fingers were numb from the cold, but it wasn't just the weather. I was frozen inside. I expected her to drop the child and bolt into the trees. That would have made sense. That would have been nature as I understood it. I took a slow step forward, and then she did something I'll never forget. Carefully, almost gently, she lowered her head and placed the baby on the snow. I didn't move, not a muscle. She stepped back 3 paces, never taking her eyes off me. The wind teased the frost from her fur. The baby whimpered, a thin, trembling cry that sliced straight through me. Alive. The child was alive. My throat tightened. My world, the one I thought I understood, shifted in that moment. She could have run, attacked, done anything. But she didn't. She had given him to me. I knelt, my gloves brushing the icy edge of the blanket. He was so light, his body trembling against the cold. I lifted him to my chest, feeling the weak flutter of life in him. The wolf moved again. My pulse surged. She was now barely 6 feet away, close enough for me to see each ice crystal clinging to her fur. She exhaled a visible cloud, circling slowly, then stopped at my side. Then, with no sound but the crunch of her paws, she began to dig. Snow flew in quick arcs until something dark appeared beneath, a small bundle. She tugged it free with her teeth and dropped it in the snow beside me. A bag. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a baby's bottle, still faintly warm, and another blanket, dry and soft. I nearly choked on my own breath. Who had left this here? Had she found it herself? How could she have known to bring it? I looked up at her. Those golden eyes were locked on mine, and in them I read something I still can't explain. Not a threat, not submission, but understanding. I wrapped the child in the dry blanket, pressing him against me to share my warmth. My cheeks stung from the wind, but I barely noticed anymore. There was only one thought in my mind. I had to follow her. She turned and walked toward the trees, glancing back at me every few steps. I hesitated. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Part of me thought it was over, that this was the miracle, and I could go back to the village knowing I'd witnessed the impossible. But what she did next made me forget how to breathe. I stepped out onto the narrow trail as quietly as I could, my boots sinking into the crusted snow. The she-wolf stopped instantly, her body still, but her eyes locked on mine. She didn't bare her teeth. She didn't growl. She just stood there, her breath fogging in the air between us. And in that moment, she looked at me as if I were one of her own. The baby whimpered softly in her jaws, not the shriek of fear or pain, but a weak, almost questioning sound. She adjusted her hold, careful, deliberate, the way I'd seen wolves carry their pups in spring. Every instinct in me screamed to act, to take the child and run. My knees tensed, my hand hovered over my rifle, though I didn't want to use it. I took a slow step forward, and in that instant, I was certain she'd bolt, vanish into the tree line like any wild creature would when cornered by a human. That was the ending I expected, the ending that made sense. But she didn't. Instead, she moved toward me. Just one step. Her paws pressed into the snow, leaving deep prints, and the sound of them breaking through the crust was louder than my heartbeat. Her gaze never wavered. Then, with a slow, careful motion, she bent her head and placed the baby on the snow between us. I froze. She backed away 3 paces, her tail low but not tucked, her head still high. It wasn't fear. It was space, an unspoken permission. The child stirred in the blanket, his tiny fists pressing against the cold air. I stepped forward, crouching, my hands shaking as I gathered him into my arms. His skin was icy against my gloves, his breathing shallow but steady. The she-wolf didn't move. She just watched. Her ears twitched once at the baby's soft cry, but she stayed rooted, her eyes on mine. I could feel something passing between us in that gaze. Not words, not thoughts, but a certainty I couldn't explain. It hit me then, hard. She wasn't here to harm. She had brought him to me. I wanted to believe that was all there was to it, a miracle in the snow, a story I could take back to the village and never forget. I even told myself right then, this is it. It's over. But it wasn't over. Because as I wrapped the baby tighter and rose to my feet, she took a step forward again. She wasn't done. Her head turned slightly, ears pricked, eyes shifting toward the deeper forest. Then she looked back at me, holding that look for a long, deliberate moment. It wasn't random. She was signaling me. I had no reason to follow. I had every reason to turn back, to get this baby to warmth and safety as fast as my legs could carry us. But there was something in her posture. Steady, patient, as if she were waiting for me to understand. The wind hissed through the pines. Somewhere far off, a branch cracked under the weight of snow. She didn't flinch. She just waited. My boots crunched as I took one step toward her. Her tail gave the smallest twitch, then she turned and started down the trail, her paws silent now on the snow. She glanced back once, checking that I was behind her. I held the baby close, his tiny body pressed against my chest for warmth, and I followed. I didn't know why. I didn't know where. I only knew one thing. This was not just a gesture of trust. I didn't yet realize it was something far more urgent. I adjusted the baby in my arms, making sure the blanket was tight around him. His small breaths puffed against my chest, fragile and uneven. I turned to head back toward the road, but the she-wolf wasn't leaving. She stood a few yards away, her eyes locked on me. Then, without warning, she dropped her head and began to dig. Snow flew in bursts beneath her paws, spraying against the air like shards of ice. She worked fast, almost frantic, sending clumps behind her. I watched, unsure if this was some instinct, some distraction, until something dark broke through the white. She slowed, pawing more carefully now, then nudged the object free with her muzzle. It was a small canvas sack. She backed up slightly, letting me see it. My boots crunched over the snow as I crouched down, keeping one arm firm around the baby while reaching for the sack with the other. The fabric was stiff with frost, but it wasn't frozen solid. I pulled the flap open. Inside was a baby's bottle, capped, half-filled, and still faintly warm. Beneath it was a folded fleece blanket, dry and soft. For a moment, my brain couldn't make sense of it. A wolf didn't collect human things. Someone must have dropped this, maybe days ago, and she'd found it by chance. That's what I told myself. That made it easier. I even muttered aloud, some hiker must have lost it. But when I looked up, she was staring at me again. Not just staring, holding me there with her eyes. Then she made a sound. It wasn't a snarl. It wasn't the sharp bark wolves use to call their pack. It was lower, almost a growl, but steady, like she was urging me, pressing me forward. The sound sent a shiver through me. She wasn't warning me off. She was asking, no, demanding, that I follow her. I glanced down at the child. His eyelids fluttered, his lips moving faintly, as if trying to feed. My instincts told me to get him back to warmth as soon as possible. Every second in this cold was a risk. And yet, there was something about the way she stood, her body angled toward the forest, but her head turned toward me, ears pricked, waiting. It was absurd to think an animal could be telling me something. But she'd already done the impossible by bringing me this child alive. Was I really going to decide, right here, that I'd reached the limit of what I was willing to believe? I took a breath and stepped toward her. She shifted instantly, turning deeper into the woods. Every few paces she'd look back, checking that I was still behind her. I clutched the baby close, feeling the faint warmth of the bottle in my coat pocket, and moved as quickly as the snow would allow. The forest closed in around us. Branches heavy with snow bent low, brushing my shoulders. My breath came out in clouds, mixing with the thin mist of hers, when she slowed to let me keep up. I told myself this was crazy. I told myself I was risking both our lives following a predator into the deep woods in the middle of winter. But I couldn't shake the feeling, deep in my bones, that turning back now would mean leaving something undone. I didn't know it yet, but this was no random trail she was leading me on. I kept going, and that's when it began. The kind of thing you don't even want to imagine. The she-wolf's trail cut deeper into the forest, winding between tall pines until the trees thinned into a small clearing. My legs burned from pushing through the drifts, but I kept going, clutching the baby to my chest. Then I saw it. At the far side of the clearing, a massive spruce had toppled in the last storm, its trunk heavy with snow. Beneath it, half buried, was the faint outline of a vehicle. For a moment I thought it was abandoned, just another wreck the winter had claimed. But as I got closer, I saw the frost patterns on the glass, the way they had melted slightly on the inside. There was someone in there. The she-wolf slowed, circling the car in wide, deliberate arcs. She didn't approach the doors. She didn't try to get inside. She just kept her distance, eyes sweeping the woods, ears flicking at every sound. I waded through the snow to the driver's side, brushing away the powder that had built up against the window. A woman sat slumped in the seat, her head resting against the steering wheel. Her skin was pale, her lips tinged blue. For one heart-stopping second, I thought she was gone. Then I saw the faintest rise and fall of her chest. She was breathing, barely. I tried the door. It resisted for a moment, frozen in place, then gave way with a groan. Cold air rushed in. She stirred slightly, a shallow gasp escaping her lips. I glanced back at the wolf. She had stopped moving, standing perfectly still now, watching me, guarding the clearing. And that's when it hit me. The way she'd stayed close to the baby, the way she'd led me here, the way she was positioned now. She'd been watching over them, protecting them, until someone came. She had been the sentry. I pulled the blanket from my pack and draped it over the woman, checking her pulse. Weak, but there. The baby shifted in my arms, as if sensing we had found the one he belonged to. For a moment, I thought this was the end of it. The pieces all made sense now. The baby, the bottle, the trail. She'd brought me to his mother. My job was clear. Get them both out. Get them warm. Get them safe. I even let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. But before I could take another step toward the car, the she-wolf turned. She didn't wait for me. She didn't look back. She simply slipped between the trees, her gray coat vanishing against the snow and shadows. It was like she'd finished what she came to do. I thought that was the last I'd see of her. I was wrong. Her story had only just begun. Several days passed before my hands stopped shaking whenever I thought about that day in the woods. The woman and her baby were safe now, recovering in the small clinic in town. I'd checked on them twice, though I didn't tell her exactly how I'd found them. I wasn't sure she'd believe me, but I couldn't stop thinking about the wolf. Every night, lying in my cabin, I'd see her amber eyes in the dark, hear the crunch of her paws in the snow, feel that strange certainty in my chest, that she'd trusted me with something beyond comprehension. I told myself she was long gone, back to her own life somewhere deep in the forest, and that I'd never see her again. Then, one morning, I was out checking trap lines along the riverbank when movement caught my eye. She stepped out from between the spruces, the sunlight flashing along her fur. For a second, I thought I was imagining her, just my mind pulling me back to the memory. But no, she was real. She was here, and she wasn't alone. 3 small shapes stumbled after her, their paws clumsy in the crusted snow. Wolf pups, barely old enough to keep up with her, their ears too big for their heads, their legs wobbly. I froze where I stood, my breath caught halfway in my throat. She spotted me instantly. There was no hesitation in her steps. She padded forward, her pups trailing behind, stopping every few feet to sniff the air or tumble into one another. My first instinct was to turn and leave, to give her space. She was with her young, and wolves can be unpredictable when it comes to protecting their own. That was the smart thing to do, the safe thing. I even started to step back, telling myself, this isn't my place, but she didn't growl, didn't stop. Instead, she kept closing the distance between us until she was just 10 feet away. Then she turned her head, made a soft, low sound, and the pups came stumbling up beside her. One by one, they moved closer, so close I could see their tiny paws pressing into the snow. The smallest one, with a patch of white on his chest, sniffed at my boot before collapsing in a little heap. And that's when it hit me. She was showing them to me. She was introducing me to her family. The air seemed to still around us. The river murmured faintly under the ice, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. I crouched slowly, meeting her gaze. There was no fear in it, just that same strange recognition I'd felt before. We stayed like that for what felt like minutes, neither of us moving, the pups nosing around in the snow between us. It should have ended there, a quiet moment in the winter sun before she gathered her young and slipped away. But then I noticed something. Tracks in the snow, not hers, not the pups, bigger, wider, leading away from the tree line and looping around behind us. Bear tracks. I didn't understand why they were there yet, but I would. And when I did, I realized she hadn't just come to show me her pups. She had come because she needed me again, The bear tracks were fresh. I could tell by the way the snow edges were still crumbling into the depressions. The size of them made my stomach tighten. A big male, heavy enough to break through the icy crust with every step. And he was close. The she-wolf stood over her pups now, her ears high, her gaze fixed on the direction the tracks came from. Her tail was low but steady, no panic, just readiness. That's when I understood. She hadn't just wandered into my path to show me her family. She had led me here, the same way she had with the baby. She needed help. I looked down at the tracks again, following their arc through the trees. They weren't random. They looped around, then angled toward the clearing where her pups had been playing in the snow. The bear wasn't just passing through, he was hunting. I swore under my breath and reached for the old radio in my coat pocket. I wasn't far from one of the other lines, where 2 hunters were working their own trap checks. They answered quick, their voices cracking in the cold air. Within 10 minutes, I heard the crunch of snowshoes and the rattle of rifles being unslung. The bear must have caught our scent before we saw him. A low, rolling growl came from the tree line, and then he stepped out, a massive dark shape against the white. His head swung slowly from side to side, and even from 30 yards I could see the frost caked on his muzzle. The hunters spread out, shouting, waving their arms. I fired a single shot into the air, the sound exploding through the clearing like a thunderclap. The bear stopped, sniffed, then let out a bellowing roar that rattled in my chest. It could have gone either way, but after a few long, tense seconds, he turned. The crunch of his retreat faded into the forest, leaving only the echo of our voices and the quick panting of the wolf pups. I lowered my rifle. The hunters moved in closer, one of them muttering, "Never seen one that bold this early in the season." I didn't answer. My eyes were on her. The she-wolf stood at the far edge of the clearing, the pups pressed against her legs. She didn't move toward me, didn't make a sound, but her gaze was steady. And I knew she understood what had just happened. Then, with a flick of her ears, she herded the pups toward the shadow of the trees. I thought that was it. I'd done my part. She would vanish now, the way wild things do, folding back into the wilderness, where I'd never find her again. I even told myself she was gone for good. But the next morning, I saw her again. Not close, just a pale shape between the trunks, half hidden by mist. She didn't approach. She just stood there watching. She stayed like that for 3 days, always near, always just far enough away that I couldn't reach her. I didn't know it then, but she wasn't lingering out of caution. She was waiting. And when she finally stepped forward, it wasn't to ask for help. It was to give me something I never expected, her final gift. Spring had come quietly that year. The snow was retreating in ragged patches, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine sap. The rivers ran high, swollen with meltwater, and the forest was waking up, the kind of season when you start to believe winter might really be over. I was walking the ridge trail one morning, the sun warm on my shoulders, when I saw her. The she-wolf. She stood in the open at the far end of the clearing, her coat thinner now, the frost long gone from her fur. There was no tension in her stance, no flicker of caution in her eyes. I stopped where I was, the years of habit telling me not to crowd her space. But she didn't move away. Instead, she came toward me. Her steps were unhurried, steady, the pads of her paws almost silent against the damp ground. When she reached the edge of my shadow, she began to circle me slowly, not in a predator's arc, but in something else entirely. Then she stopped in front of me, her head lowered, her jaws opening just enough for something to drop onto the ground at my feet, a piece of fresh deer hide. I stared at it, not quite believing what I was seeing. Wolves sometimes carry food for their pack, their pups, but this wasn't for them. This was for me, a gift. The weight of that sank into me so hard, I had to take a breath before I could move. I crouched, my eyes never leaving hers, and picked up the hide. It was still warm from the hunt. She watched me without blinking, her amber gaze steady. And that's when the thought struck me, clear as the morning air. This is gratitude I haven't earned, because what I had done, bringing her to the mother and the child, helping protect her pups, it didn't seem like enough to warrant this. Not from her, not from the wild. We stayed like that for a long moment, two creatures from different worlds sharing the same space, neither of us making a sound. Eventually, she stepped back. Her tail swayed once, a slow, deliberate movement, before she turned as if to leave. I thought that was the end of it. That this was the closing of our story, the part where we both walked away with nothing left unsaid. But then I heard a voice, a woman's voice. I turned, and there, just beyond the line of bushes, was the mother. The same woman I'd pulled from the frozen car months ago. Her hair was longer now, her face fuller, the pallor of that winter day replaced with color, and in her arms was the child. The same child I had first seen in the wolf's jaws. They both stood there, the woman smiling faintly, the boy's wide eyes fixed on me, and then, to my surprise, on the wolf. The she-wolf had stopped. She looked at them, and the boy reached a small hand toward her from the safety of his mother's arms. The forest felt suddenly smaller, as if the distance between all of us had collapsed into a single point in time. And that's when I understood. She stepped out from the trees, the boy in her arms, the spring sunlight warming both their faces. I still had the piece of deer hide in my hands, its warmth fading into my palms. For a long moment, no one moved. The she-wolf stood at the edge of the clearing, her head high, her amber eyes shifting between me and the woman. It was the woman who broke the silence. "I've been looking for you," she said, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. I took a step toward her, the soft earth muffling my boots. You're all right?" She nodded, her gaze dropping briefly to the child in her arms before lifting again to me. "We are. Because of you." I started to shake my head, but she cut me off. "And because of her." The boy wriggled slightly, his eyes fixed on the wolf, a tiny hand reaching out toward her. The she-wolf didn't move closer, but she didn't back away either. The woman's voice dropped, almost as if she wasn't sure she should say what came next. That night, I remember pieces. I'd been driving too fast, trying to beat the storm. The car slid, hit something, rolled into the trees. I must have blacked out. But before I did, she glanced at the wolf again. I saw her. My breath caught. She was just sitting there, the woman said, right outside the broken window, snow falling all around her. I could barely move, but I remember her eyes. I remember feeling safe, like nothing could get to us. I could see it in my mind, the car half buried in snow, the woman slumped inside, and the she-wolf standing guard in the blizzard, watching, waiting. She didn't let anything near us, the woman went on. I heard movement in the dark. I think other animals came close, but they didn't stay. She was there until you came. I know it. Something inside me shifted. I'd spent all this time thinking she had acted on some rare impulse, a flash of wild instinct that happened to save a life. But it wasn't that. It was deliberate. The same way she'd guarded her own pups from the bear, she had guarded this woman and her child, not for food, not for territory, not for any reason I could explain with logic. For them. I looked back at her. She was still there, silent, her gaze steady. And in that moment, I felt the full weight of what had happened. The fear of seeing her with that baby in her jaws, the astonishment when she laid him at my feet, the urgency when she led me to the wreck, the quiet understanding in her eyes when I'd returned her gift. Fear had given way to gratitude Gratitude had swelled into something heavier, something that tightened in my throat and made my vision blur. And now it was something else entirely. Reverence. Because this wasn't just about a rescue, this wasn't a coincidence. She hadn't only saved her own blood, she had crossed that invisible line between wild and human, and she had done it with purpose. The boy laughed suddenly, a bright, small sound. His mother smiled and looked at me. "He likes her," she said softly. I managed a nod, though my chest felt too tight to speak. We stood there until the wolf finally turned, walking back toward the trees without hurry, her shape fading into the green and gold light. She didn't look back this time. I let out a slow breath. "If someone had told me this," I said, half to myself, "I wouldn't have believed them." My eyes stayed on the spot where she'd vanished, but I saw it with my own eyes. The she-wolf saved a human being the way she would save her own. And I knew I would carry that truth with me for the rest of my life. 3 years ago, I carried 3 tiny wolf pups out of a burning forest, never expecting to see them again. Last week, they came back, grown, wild, and with a debt to repay. When I saw the wolf step out from the bend and stop 3 steps from my tractor, my heart froze because I realized this was not an accident. He recognized me. For a second, I forgot to breathe. The engine clattered under me, rattling like a box of loose bolts, and the morning fog hugged the field so tight it felt like the world had narrowed to the size of my front wheels and his eyes. I thought this was where it would end, with a lunge or a flash of teeth, and I braced for it. But nature had a different surprise waiting. He was a big gray, taller than my thigh, ribs hidden under winter-thick fur that hadn't yet let go, though the frost was gone. He didn't crouch. He didn't bare his teeth. He didn't even flick an ear like most wild ones do when a machine's noise grates on them. He just stood there and looked straight into me, the way a person looks when they are searching your face for a name. The tractor coughed and idled. My hands were shaking on the wheel. I reached to cut the engine, then stopped, then reached again, like a man stuck between 2 doors in a fire. Finally, I turned the key. The field went quiet. The quiet felt heavier than the noise. The wolf blinked, slow, as if to show me he was not going anywhere. That was when a picture rose in my head so sharp it stung my eyes. Smoke like a black river pouring through trees, pine needles popping from heat, the choking bitter taste that sticks to your tongue for days, and in the middle of it all, the tiny throats of pups crying from a hole at the base of a burned birch. 3 years back, I had driven this same tractor into a wall of heat that made metal sing, dragging the blade to cut a path to the creek. I had no right to stop. I stopped anyway. I remember a shape in the haze, a she-wolf, pacing, eyes on the ground, and then on me, a silent storm of fear and fury that somehow did not break. I remember scooping each hot, trembling body into my work coat. I remember her walking beside me, close enough to touch, and my legs going weak, because in her eyes there was such a plea that I started to cry. I set the pups down in the wet sand and backed away. She took them one by one, and then the smoke swallowed her. I told myself it was done. I told myself I would never see any of them again. And now this. "Easy," I said out loud, though my voice came out thin. My breath made a small cloud in the chill. He flicked his nose once, twice, tasting the air between us. I could hear a lark somewhere above the fog. I could hear my pulse in my ears. My fingers found the door latch, pushed it open. The hinge squealed. He didn't flinch. I slid down from the seat and felt the wet grass cold through my boots. The distance closed by 1 step, his, and the sound of it was the softest thing, a pad pressing grass, a small exhale like someone easing a burden onto the ground. I've been around wild animals long enough to know when you are luck and when you are lunch. This was neither. This was something I did not have a name for. He kept his head level and his tail low, not tucked in fear, not raised in challenge. He held my gaze like a dog waiting for a signal, and yet he was not tame, not in any way. Wildness hummed off him the way heat hums off a road in August. It was the closeness that shook me, the unafraid closeness. He looked at me like I was his own. I crouched without thinking, hands open, palms out. I had grease under my nails and a slice on my thumb from a stubborn hose clamp. The metal smell of the tractor mixed with wet earth and the faint musk of him. He stepped closer, slow, close enough that if I reached, I could have touched the white patch under his jaw. I didn't reach. His eyes were amber, and in them I saw something I never expected to see in a predator's face looking straight at me. Recognition. Not the kind you project onto a memory when you want it to mean something. Real recognition. Like the flicker people get when they place you in a story you once shared. My knees started to shake. Fear and reverence slammed together in my chest until I couldn't separate them. I thought of that day by the creek, of the wet sand, of the way the she-wolf had paused, just for a heartbeat, before taking the last pup, her eyes on mine, something like thanks passing through them so fast I could have said I imagined it. Only I hadn't imagined it then, and I sure wasn't imagining this now. He lowered his head, then lifted it and sniffed toward the tractor's front tire. Mud clung there from the low spot near the ditch that always stays soggy in spring. He stepped to the side and circled once, never showing me his back, never taking his eyes fully off me. He was reading the ground. It was like watching a person re-enter a room where a long-ago conversation once happened and search for the exact place they had stood. He stopped where my boot prints were dark in the grass from climbing down. He placed one paw inside one of them and left it there for a heartbeat. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I don't know what made me do it, habit maybe, but I said, soft as I could, "You remember." I felt foolish the second the words left my mouth. But his ear twitched, and he breathed out, and for the life of me it felt like an answer. Behind him, the fog thinned and shifted, and I saw the shadow of the tree line, black and patient. I thought he'd turn then and make for the cover. I thought whatever thread had stretched between us would snap and leave me standing there with my heart in my hands and nothing to show for it but a story no one would believe. I even took a step back toward the tractor, ready to climb up and tell myself it was just a wolf doing a wolf's morning, and I had been the one to add meaning. I thought it was over, but he did not leave. He put his paw down, lifted his head again, and took one more step toward me. Close now. He tilted his head, just once, the way dogs do when they listen for words they know. The scar by his left eye, thin as thread, pale against gray, caught what little light there was. Had I seen that scar before, on a pup scrambling in my coat while ash rained? The thought split me open. I felt tears sting, ridiculous as that sounds for a grown man in a muddy field with a dead quiet tractor and a wild wolf breathing clouds in front of him. I was scared and grateful at the same time. I wanted to bow my head. I wanted to run. "Okay," I whispered, though I didn't know what I was agreeing to. He blinked again, slow, and then, God help me, his body softened. Not in surrender, in trust. The kind of trust you don't ask for because you're not big enough to carry it if it's given. The kind that comes back to you after years like a debt repaid with interest you never expected. I stood there shaking, the fog lifting in thin veils, the field waking up around us, and I knew down to the bone that I had stepped into something I would not be able to explain. This was not chance. This was not hunger. This was not a mistake made by a foolish animal. This was a meeting, and whatever came next, it had been a long time coming. The smell of smoke has a way of settling into your skin, into your bones, until you can taste it even when you close your mouth. That day, 3 years ago, the whole sky was a burning bruise, and the air was so thick with ash it felt like breathing soup. The sun was gone behind the smoke. The heat came in waves that made the edges of the trees ripple like they were melting. You couldn't see more than 20 feet in front of the tractor, but I kept the blade down, grinding a path toward the river so the fire crews could get through. Every push of the throttle felt like shoving against the end of the world. The sound was constant, trees snapping like bones, the fire's roar eating everything, the tractor's engine screaming for air, and then, under it all, something else, faint, high-pitched, a squeal maybe, or a cry. I told myself it was a branch breaking or a bird too stupid to fly away, but I couldn't shake it. I eased off the throttle. The engine sputtered and fell to a growl. There it was again, sharp, quick, and desperate. I swung down off the tractor, my boots sinking in the soft dirt churned by the blade. The heat was worse on the ground, like kneeling too close to a bonfire. I followed the sound, half blinded by smoke, my shirt sticking to my back. It came from the base of a scorched birch, the bark blackened and curling like old paint. There was a hole there, barely more than a dark slit in the earth. Inside, movement, a wriggle of small gray shapes, fur singed in patches, eyes still cloudy from being so young. Pups. Wolf pups. Before I could process that, a shape burst through the smoke, low, fast, and wide-shouldered. The mother. Her coat was ash-dusted. The fur along her spine bristled, but she didn't lunge. She didn't even snarl. She paced tight circles between me and the hole, her sides heaving, her eyes locked on mine like she was holding me there by will alone. We stared at each other, both of us too close to the fire, both of us not moving. The roar in my ears wasn't just the flames anymore. It was my own pulse. I could have backed away. I could have left. I didn't. I crouched instead, slow, lowering myself until I was at the level of her pups. She froze mid-step, panting hard, her tail low. Her gaze didn't waver, and in that look, through the smoke and the heat, was something I'll never forget. It wasn't challenge. It wasn't submission. It was a plea, a raw, silent begging that hit me like a hammer. There was such a plea in her eyes that I felt tears burn up behind mine. I pulled my work jacket off, wrapped it around the pups, one at a time, their tiny bodies trembling against my hands. They smelled of scorched fur and fear. The mother stood close enough that I could feel the heat from her body, but she didn't interfere. When I straightened with the bundle against my chest, she fell in step beside me. We moved through the smoke together, me, stumbling under the heat and weight, her, pacing at my side, glancing up at me like she was counting each step. At the riverbank, I laid them down on the damp sand. They whimpered and squirmed, their small paws clawing for the safety of her scent. She didn't rush. She touched each one with her nose, then lifted them gently, one after the other, carrying them to a patch of tall grass just beyond the reach of the fire's breath. When she came back for the last one, she paused, looked right at me, held it, just long enough for me to feel something pass between us, quick and wordless. Then she turned, vanished into the smoke with her pup in her jaws. I stood there until the river's cool air finally reached me, until the trees around me were just shadows in the ash. I thought that was the end. I thought she would vanish into whatever wild corner she called home, and I would never see her, or them, again. But nature had a different plan. He stood there, silent, as if carved out of the fog itself. No growl, no bared teeth, just that unblinking stare that reached deeper than it should have. His chest rose and fell in slow rhythm, and even from a few yards away I could see the frost of his breath bloom in the cool air. Then the brush behind him shifted. A ripple in the green, a low shuffle, and two more shapes emerged, smaller, but not by much. Their coats were thick with the same silver gray as his, their eyes the same gold that caught and held you. They moved without hurry, their steps measured, as though this meeting had been decided long before I'd stepped into the field that morning. One of them carried something in its jaws, a limp shape, long ears dangling. My mind went instantly to defense, the old reflexes firing. 3 wolves, close range, nowhere to climb if they decided I was worth the effort. But then I noticed their posture, tails low, ears relaxed, heads not angled to strike. It wasn't the stance of hunters closing in, it was something else entirely. The smaller wolf came forward, the rabbit's fur swaying with each step. It stopped just short of the tractor, close enough for me to see the flecks of mud on its legs, then bent its head and set the rabbit down on the damp earth. No tearing, no feeding, just placing it there, neat and deliberate. My breath caught. A gift. The big one, him, took a single step toward me, his eyes never leaving mine. And in that moment, in that gaze that didn't waver, I felt it as surely as I've ever felt anything. He was looking at me like I was his own, not prey, not a stranger, something else, something remembered. I didn't move. Neither did they. The air between us felt fragile, like a wire strung too tight. The big wolf lowered his head briefly toward the rabbit, then stepped back, his paws silent in the grass. The younger two shifted, ready to follow his lead. I thought that was it. I thought they'd leave, fading into the trees, with that strange offering left behind for me to puzzle over alone. But I should have known better. The rain the night before had turned the far edge of the field into a patch of deep, sucking mud, but I'd been too focused on the wolves to think about it. When I climbed back into the tractor and tried to move, the rear wheels spun in place, spraying dark arcs of muck. I eased the throttle, tried rocking it forward and back, but the tires only sank deeper, the machine leaning just enough to make my stomach knot. I glanced toward the tree line, half expecting the wolves to have vanished while I was distracted. They hadn't. The big one stood exactly where he'd been, ears forward, watching me. The 2 younger wolves paced in a slow arc, their paws leaving prints in the softened ground. Then something happened. I still can't quite explain. Instead of melting into the safety of the woods, they came closer. The smaller of the pair trotted to the rear wheel, sniffing at the churned earth, then began digging, powerful swipes of its paws, flinging mud in clumps. The other joined in at the opposite wheel, widening the trench like they knew exactly what I was trying to do. I just sat there staring, hands loose on the wheel. Wolves digging out a tractor. It was absurd. And yet there it was, happening in front of me. The big wolf moved last. He circled to the side of the cab, close enough that I could see the rise and fall of his ribs. Then he leaned his shoulder into the lower frame of the tractor. It wasn't a battering shove, more of a steady, braced push, his claws finding grip in the mud. The cab tilted slightly under the pressure, just enough to shift the weight. I pressed the throttle. The engine roared, the wheels caught, and with a sucking groan, the tractor lurched free of the hole, spattering all of us with cold mud. I cut the engine again, heart pounding. The smaller wolves backed off, their coats splattered brown, tongues lolling slightly as they caught their breath. The big one stepped away from the side of the machine, shook once, and looked up at me. That same steady, measuring gaze. No rush, no fear, just acknowledgement. Then he turned, flicked his tail once, and headed for the trees. The younger two followed without a sound. I thought that was it. That whatever strange thread bound us had finally gone slack and they'd disappear into the wild where they belonged. But I was wrong. A week later, I found myself back in the same stretch of field, the ground firmer now, the air carrying the first warmth of spring. I wasn't expecting anything. Truth be told, I'd convinced myself that the whole encounter had been a one-time thing, some strange and fleeting intersection of lives, but then I saw it. Right in the center of the dirt track, where my tires would pass, lay a small, neat pile of fish. 4 of them, silver and still glistening in the morning light, arranged as carefully as if someone had set them out for market. No drag marks, no scatter, just placed there, waiting. I cut the engine and stepped down, boots crunching in the gravel. The smell of fresh water and scales reached me, sharp and clean. These fish hadn't been dead long. I crouched, touching one lightly, cool to the skin. They were an offering. Something made me look up toward the edge of the woods. There they were, 3 silhouettes standing in the break between the trees, still as stone. The big one in front, the 2 younger behind him. Even from here I could feel the weight of their eyes. No movement, no sound, just that quiet, patient watching. Then the big wolf lifted his head. The sound that followed rolled across the field, not the sharp, defiant cry I'd heard on winter nights, but a long, low note that swelled and softened at the edges. It was not a warning. It was not a challenge. It was farewell. I felt something shift in my chest, a tightness that was part ache, part awe. In that moment, standing there with the scent of fish in the air and the sun breaking through behind them, I understood without doubt. They had come to return the debt. The big wolf held my gaze for one last heartbeat, then turned, leading the others into the shadows of the trees. This time, I didn't try to follow. I just stood there, the wind brushing past me, watching until the forest swallowed them whole. I stood there long after the last shadow slipped into the trees, staring at the empty clearing as if they might step back out again. The pile of fish lay at my feet, the morning sun catching on their scales, and all I could hear was the echo of that low, rolling call still hanging in my chest. It came over me slow at first, then all at once. The truth I'd been circling around since that foggy morning a week ago. Those wolves, they were the pups I had carried out of the fire, grown now, stronger, with the kind of wild self-possession you only see in creatures that survive both nature and man. They hadn't just found me, they'd remembered, and they'd come back. For a moment I wondered if I was building a story out of nothing, stitching old memories to new moments because I wanted it to mean something. Maybe they weren't the same wolves. Maybe this was just coincidence dressed up as fate. But then I looked down at the ground. The road was soft from last night's rain, and there they were, 3 sets of fresh tracks leading straight from the forest's edge to where I stood. No mistaking them, no talking myself out of what I'd seen. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. I swallowed hard, the back of my throat tight, and found my voice dropping to a whisper, not because I was afraid, but because anything louder would have broken whatever was still lingering in the space between us. "This doesn't happen," I murmured, almost to myself. "It can't happen." I closed my eyes for a second, saw again the smoke, the trembling pups in my jacket, the she-wolf's eyes holding mine, and now, these 3, standing in the trees with a gift at their feet. When I opened my eyes, the clearing was still empty. The tracks were still there, the fish still glistened in the sun. "It doesn't happen," I said again, my voice no more than breath. But I saw it. I saw it myself,